Alright, this is Unit 20 video lesson, Part 5, over ecological succession. This will be the last video lesson for Unit 20. You should be completing the ecological succession interactive notebooking as you are watching the video, as that will be counted as your notes for this video lesson. Make sure you pause the video to get everything written down and rewatch any parts that you may need to rewatch. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. Right, so ecological succession is the change in the makeup or composition of an ecological community. All right, so this means that this is changing. All communities change over time. Our environment is changing over time, right? It's able to recover from natural disasters. That is what we're talking about when we're talking about ecological succession, is how environments change. If we were to go outside and dig up all the grass in an area, right, just leaving the dirt, after a couple of weeks we would come back and we would see that the grass has regrown in that area, right? So just like if you cut down a forest over many years, the plants will begin to regrow in that area, and eventually a new forest will take its place. So our environment has the ability to recover from destruction, as well as to grow in places where there's never been anything growing before. So there's two types of succession. But first, let's finish filling out the rest of this little paragraph. All right, so the community begins with a few pioneer organisms. All right, so pioneer, you've all heard that word before. A pioneer organism is going to be an organism that's going to be the first one settling that area, the first ones growing in that area. So first to grow. And your pioneer organisms are going to be like your lichens and your moss. Okay, so those are examples of pioneer organisms. So if you think of the word pioneer in terms of people, when we think of the pioneers in early America, right, they were moving west into the frontier. They were pioneers. They were the first ones settling the new area in order to bring new civilization to that part of the country. Alright, so the community begins with a few pioneer organisms and develops over time with more complex organisms. Okay, so complex organisms like after time has passed and we start being able to get more and more things growing in that area, we're going to start to see animals and things like that move into the area. Right, so we have over time more complex organisms grow until it is stable as what we call a climax community. So the climax is the most developed a community can get. This is going to be your very mature forest and environments. Right, so there are two types of succession, like I mentioned earlier. Primary succession is the first type, and primary succession is going to occur within communities that have never been occupied. Okay, so this means nothing has ever lived there. So think of like on the side of a volcano. After a volcano erupts, there's nothing living there on the lava rock. That would be an example of a primary community. So primary succession, think volcanoes. Right. The most common type of ecological succession, however, is actually secondary. Secondary succession. Okay, and this is what's going to occur after a severe disturbance or disaster. This type of disturbance could include like a flood, or maybe a fire, burns a forest fire, or we have like a hurricane or tornado, something like that. Like think natural disaster destroys an area, and so it's not completely destroyed. It's not going to be primary succession because this has already been established before, so there's still going to be some of the original community there, but we're basically having to regrow from what we had, but we're not necessarily starting from scratch like we would be if this was primary succession. Right. Another example would be the removal of a habitat for instance, logging, if we remove a forest by cutting down the trees, that would be an example of secondary succession. Right, so sometimes humans can interfere and cause ecological succession to occur by doing things like logging and cutting down trees and things like that. All right, so now let's go through an example of succession, of secondary succession. All right, you should be looking at your notebooking now to fill in the diagram below. So we have two types of succession. In primary succession, we're going to have our pioneers are going to be mostly our lichens and our mosses. All right, so that's in primary succession. So we're in our and these are going to occur, start growing between, right when it happens up until like through the first year. All right, so in primary succession, we're going to have lichens and mosses. In secondary succession, our pioneer plants can also include grasses and ferns and other types of herbs. Okay, so plants that aren't growing very big. So you're going to fill this into the first box underneath the diagram there. Here, 0 to 1, this is when we have our pioneer species beginning to grow. If you look at the picture here, you can see there's not much growing, okay? There's no tall plants, there's no bushes, there's no trees. Everything is going to be a low growing plant that's growing low to the ground. This is going to be important to establish the soil so that larger plants can begin to grow later on. Right, next between the year 3 and through 20, this is going to be when we start to see some perennial flowers. These are flowers that are going to be growing year after year. We're going to start to see small shrubs and maybe small pine trees. All right, so you're going to fill this into your second box here. If you look at your picture above that, you can see here we start to see small plants, small trees, shrubs, more types of grasses and things like that that are beginning to grow in our environment in this community. Right, next we have year 20 to year 70. Right, so from year 20 to year 70, this is when we're going to have our young forest. We're going to have some pine trees now, some hardwood, different types of hardwoods, and they're going to be getting to start developing the understory of our forest, which means they're going to be growing taller, and we'll have some shorter plants mixed in as well. So this is going to go into your third box, and if you look above that, that's going to be mostly what this is going to look like. We see some taller plants, some taller trees, some shrubs still. We start to see a more variety of plants and things during this top part of succession. Right, from year 70 to year 100, this is when we're going to have our mature forest hardwood understory is developing and taking over the remnant pines. So now we go from having not only pine trees to now we're going to have more different types of trees like oak trees and things like that that grow to being a lot taller and sturdier than our pine trees. So this is going to go in your fourth box here. And if we look above that, you can see this, that now we see the transition in going from a pine forest into a forest with the taller, more mature hardwoods. Right, from 100 years up, this is going to be about the time when we've reached our climax community. So you're going to fill this into your last box over here. And this is going to mean that we have a stable community now, and these plants are going to be dominated. These plants are going to be dominating the environment. So we're going to have tall trees, bushes. We're going to have lots of different types of variety of plants living now. Right. This also means that our hardwoods are going to be reproducing easily, and so it's going to be a more stable environment. If you look here at the end, you can see there's our mature forest. And so if we look back over from the beginning, from year 0 all the way up to year 100, you can see how over time this community has regrown or grown from the beginning, depending on if we're talking about primary succession or secondary succession. But we have grown into an established forest area, all right, which is now going to be able to be inhabited by all sorts of different types of living organisms. All All right, so now I'm going to have you watch a YouTube video clip called How Wolves Change Rivers. This is a very interesting description of how our communities rely on different organisms to make sure they stay balanced. This is actually an example from Yellowstone National Park and how ecological succession, along with the interdependence of different organisms on each other, actually affected the shape of the river that flows through there. So watch this, pay close attention, then we'll go over a few quick things at the end of the video.
One of the most exciting scientific findings of the past half-century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. And the classic example is what happened in the Yellowstone National Park in the United States when wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Now, we all know that wolves kill various species of animals, but perhaps we're slightly less aware that they give life to many others. One of the most exciting scientific findings of the past half-century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. And the classic example is what happened in the Yellowstone National Park in the United States when wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Now, we all know that wolves kill various species of animals, but perhaps we're slightly less aware that they give life to many others. Before the wolves turned up, they'd been absent for 70 years. The numbers of deer, because there was nothing to hunt them, had built up in the Yellowstone Park, and despite efforts by humans to control them, they'd managed to reduce much of the vegetation there to almost nothing. They'd just grazed it away. But as soon as the wolves arrived, even though they were few in number, they started to have the most remarkable effects. First, of course, they killed some of the deer, but that wasn't the major thing. Much more significantly, they radically changed the behavior of the deer. The deer started avoiding certain parts of the park, the places where they could be trapped most easily, particularly the valleys and the gorges. And immediately those places started to regenerate. In some areas, the height of the trees quintupled in just 6 years. Bare valley sides quickly became forests of aspen and willow and cottonwood. And as soon as that happened, the birds started moving in. The number of songbirds and migratory birds started to increase greatly. The number of beavers started to increase because beavers like to eat the trees. And beavers, like wolves, are ecosystem engineers. They create niches for other species. And the dams they built in the rivers provided habitats for otters and muskrats and ducks and fish and reptiles and amphibians. The wolves killed coyotes, and as a result of that, the number of rabbits and mice began to rise, which meant more hawks, more weasels, more foxes, more badgers. Ravens and bald eagles came down to feed on the carrion that the wolves had left. Bears fed on it too, and their population began to rise as well, partly also because there were more berries growing on the regenerating shrubs. And the bears reinforced the impact of the wolves by killing some of the calves of the deer. But here's where it gets really interesting. wolves changed the behaviour of the rivers. They began to meander less. There was less erosion. The channels narrowed. More pools formed. More riffle sections, all of which were great for wildlife habitats. The rivers changed in response to the wolves. And the reason was that the regenerating forests stabilised the banks so that they collapsed less often, so that the rivers became more fixed in their course. Similarly, by driving the deer out of some places and the vegetation recovering on the valley sides, there was less soil erosion because the vegetation stabilised that as well. So the wolves, small in number, transformed not just the ecosystem of the Yellowstone National Park, this huge area of land, but also
All right, so that is just a quick example of one isolated event that made a huge difference in that ecosystem, those communities in Yellowstone National Park. Simply by reintroducing the wolves, we were able to change the vegetation that lived in the area. It was able to recover. New organisms were able to come live in the area, and new types of plants were able to grow, and forests were able to become more mature and reach climax communities. All right, so our last thing I want to do is go over a few quick things to remember from the video. So some things you want to make sure you have in your brain is I want you to make sure you know what a pioneer organism is. Okay, these are the first organisms that live in that establish an environment, like lichens, mosses, and small grasses. You need to make sure you know the difference between a primary succession versus secondary. So remember that primary, that means it has never been established. Okay, so we're looking at things that we're starting from zero, from scratch. Nothing has ever lived in that place before, right? So that's not nearly as common as secondary. Secondary succession is going to be when we are recovering from some kind of disturbance or disaster, like a flood or a fire, or even human disturbances like cutting down forests and things like that. All right, so make sure you have everything glued in and written down in your journal, and make sure you get this checked off for a grade. Be sure to go back and answer, rewatch any parts that you've missed or need to rewatch, and make sure you answer the question at the end of the video.